She was parading around saying, look, I think I get all these rape threats, and therefore I want to control the internet. And she's an MP, so it's not like she's powerless, right? And I said, right, look, the point I was making is, regardless of what she says, she's going to do it anyway. So if she gets something that isn't a rape threat, they're just going to claim it is anyway, because that's the point. It's all an ideological mission, and I object to it.
Yeah.
So while I was researching my virtual abuse series, I came across some interesting footage of MP Jess Phillips, which I think deserves a wider audience than it appears to have had to date, especially among members of the YouTube community who she could be seen specifically attacking in it. It was taken in July 2016 at a relatively sparsely attended conference organised by Labour colleague Yvette Cooper's office under the banner Reclaim the Internet, which brought together representatives of a number of relevant parties, including Facebook, Twitter and the Girl Guides, to discuss the issue of online misogyny. Anywho, without further ado, I'm going to run the clip, and in the interest of context setting, fair use and transformative purposes, I'll chip in as we go with some commentary, as well as juxtapose Phillips's earlier statement on the matter when she was talking to a much larger and much more diverse audience. Apologies in advance for the quality, by the way. I've scrubbed up the audio as best I can, but Yvette Cooper's office is entirely responsible for the poor lighting and picture quality.
So, in talking about how we need to respond to this, I think I am well known for responding to it directly. I tend not to ignore it, and I have to say I agree with the sentiments this morning from some people on the panel about how we should just sit and just take it. Is not something I am ever going to do. I am considerably funnier, cleverer, and all around just better than the people who troll me. For some reason they blame their insignificance on me. They are clearly insignificant all by themselves.
Obviously such things are a matter of opinion, and in my humble subjective opinion, Jess Phillips has an incredibly inflated and unrealistic belief in her own comedic talents.
Tell us a joke then.
Lobster goes into a bar. Barman says, "You barred, get out." He said, "What was I barred for?" He said, "You were in here last night giving it all that."
Good one.
The issue that I have, and what the response is, that and I can do that because I'm sort of big enough and ugly enough to cope with some of it. However, the thing that I think where platforms need to work together and where there needs to be tech solutions and criminal justice solutions all working together is specifically around the issue of dogpiling, which I met with Twitter to talk about this week.
For the uninitiated, the gentleman to Jess Phillips's right is Nick Pickles, former director of Big Brother Watch and current head of policy in the UK for Twitter, and we'll come back to him in a moment.
So dogpiling attacks are basically when there is a call out by a troll or free speecher to basically get their colleagues, their followers to all pile in and say the same sort of thing to you.
Now, in fairness, various dictionaries and indeed Google define dogpiling as a number of people join in directing critical or abusive comments at another person or group. Crucially, this broadens the definition to include incidents of waves of collective criticism that aren't necessarily the sole responsibility of one person. If we are to follow the more narrow definition suggested by Phillips, then in my humble subjective opinion, there is very little, arguably no evidence to support the quite serious claim she is about to make against a self-employed father of two. Certainly no more than there is to suggest that one of Phillips's greatest fans, the author J.K. Rowling, called on her 13 million followers to dogpile journalist Mike Siver after she misquoted him and implied incorrectly that he wanted to see threats against female MPs like Jess Phillips succeed.
So my particular incident was around people saying that they would not rape me because I'm not good enough for a raping. That's for all you other women. You must be chuffed. So what happened to me was I had thousands and thousands of people telling me that I was not good enough for a raping. Now the original call-outs, the original tweets, the original statements about this were made by a man called Carl Benjamin. Let's check his name's Carl. His name's Sargon Akkad online. But his real name is Carl Benjamin. He lives in Swindon.
Not entirely sure what's so funny about Swindon, but I guess that's a reflection of the metropolitan elite attitude in the room. That's Antigone Davis, head of global safety policy at Facebook, sniggering away at the end of the table, by the way. So there's a couple of things to pick out from this clip, which I'll do in a minute. But first, let me play a segment of an interview that Phillips gave to the BBC the day after the incident occurred.
The number of tweets and then the retweets and those people piling in, dogpiling as you call it, mean there have been something like 5,000 tweets, pretty much referring to raping you or not raping you.
Yeah, it's about 5,000 people, 5,000 notifications or mentions that I've got.
Yeah.
I think that the vast majority of these people who are doing this are in America, so there's very little West Midlands Police can do about it. But I certainly will be contacting Twitter about some of the ringleaders of this dogpiling. I will also, I think that actually I've got to the stage now where I feel that legal action, be it civil or criminal, in some way is the way to attack these people.
Now, whilst it's entirely conceivable that Phillips was ignorant of the fact that the man who in her biography she alleges to be one of her most frequent aggressors does in fact live in England. However, it is worthwhile pointing out that when Carl Benjamin told his side of the story to the Times a few days later, an article which established that he lived in Swindon, Jess Phillips did not pursue the matter with the West Midlands Police, nor did she attempt to initiate any civil or legal action. Now, over and above the question of whether or not it would be reasonable and proportionate to lay the entire blame for the incident at Sargon of Akkad's door, presumably one of the reasons Phillips didn't pursue the matter further than Twitter's own Trust and Safety Council is that her account of the incident is in fact grossly exaggerated. You'll note that in the BBC interview, Phillips corrects herself and uses a very exact form of words involving notifications and mentions. And this is because, in reality, less than 100 people directly tweeted Phillips pledging that they wouldn't rape her. And no matter how childish or distasteful you may consider their actions to be, with one or two possible exceptions, Phillips's claim that they were saying that she was not, in her words, good enough for raping is something that struggles when subjected to closer scrutiny.
He has a YouTube channel which makes him money. He has a number of different other business models for his trolling. He makes money out of it, and when he was interviewed in the Sunday Times, he admits that I have the quote here. Benjamin admits that he has been planning to target Phillips since last November. So he has openly admitted in a national newspaper to wanting to target me.
So for the uninitiated, the incident the previous November involved Phillips being caught on camera in the Houses of Parliament, openly laughing at the prospect of allowing a debate on men's issues, and then essentially implied that the hundreds of people that complained about it on social media were essentially abusive trolls. And the way in which Carl Benjamin targeted her was by picking apart her Huffington Post article in a segment of his popular weekly analysis roundup called This Week in Stupid, which has a regular audience of over 300,000 people. And while we're on the subject of making public statements in national newspapers, it is worthwhile noting that when Phillips took to the Daily Telegraph to complain that after reviewing the incident, Twitter had concluded that neither Carl Benjamin or anyone else for that matter had breached their community guidelines, she was happy to sign off on the grossly exaggerated headline suggesting that she had been the victim of over 1,000 rape threats via the very public medium of Twitter.
So what he does is he makes YouTube videos and he sends a call out to his tens of thousands of followers, and they all then follow up with me and say the same thing to me about how they don't want to rape me because they think that that's really, really clever to not use a threat bit and then claim that they're not being abusive or threatening towards me. Now, the issue about dogpiling is not...
Hang on a minute. Let's just listen to that one more time.
I think that that's really, really clever to not use a threat bit and then claim that they're not being abusive or threatening towards me.
I've looked at the guidelines for what under existing law could be treated as a crime. And there are a number: credible threats of violence to a person or property, communications targeting an individual which may constitute harassment or stalking, communications which may be considered grossly offensive, indecent, obscene or false. Have you contacted the police?
I haven't.
In the interest of full disclosure, I should say that I believe that anyone sending a rape threat or any sort of threat of violence to an individual on social media should absolutely have their account suspended. And if there is a sense that their words could reasonably be considered as a genuine threat, then it's entirely appropriate that the police should be involved. That said, anyone paying the slightest bit of attention to Jess Phillips's claims will hopefully be aware that there is something more nuanced going on here, and it is not yet illegal to essentially take the piss out of a member of parliament, especially one so prone to exaggeration, so quick to take offence, and yet also increasingly famous for saying insulting things herself, and coincidentally, in the same week of the incident, was paid by the BBC to appear on a comedy show and provide some context to what some people clearly mischievously perceived as a genuine death threat made by Phillips against a member of the Privy Council.
Their level of discourse is that they're saying that they don't want to rape me, as if raping is something to do that they do to someone they liked. It's a strange... gosh knows where they've got it from. In my defence, before you say it, I didn't ever threaten to stab my leader, although the Metropolitan Police were called on me twice.
Were they? What did you do?
Because it seems that people online can't understand a metaphor. I mean, I don't normally, when I'm walking up and down the street, feel the need to say to people, I'm not going to mug you, I'm not going to hit you, because we're normal human beings. But yeah, it's as if I should be thankful that these people are saying that they're not going to rape me.
It's not the viciousness of attacks I get on the internet that bothers me. People talking about raping me isn't fun, but has become somewhat par for the course. Well, I'll tell you what, Jess, I think that's terrible. And you know what? I wouldn't even rape you. I wouldn't even rape you. Not even. What is a real pain is the thousands of tweets or Facebook notifications I join in. I think my record is 700 people blocked in one night. That's heroic, Jess. Well done. I can't believe there aren't feminists just giving you a round of applause for that. You blocked 700 people for disagreeing with you on the internet. That is just staggering. Unless you're saying they were all rape threats, which, I mean, let's be honest, a lot of them are probably not even rape threats. Every time a woman who has faced this internet mob goes to say anything, she pauses and thinks, I love how... You're a mind reader now, are you, Jess? Have I got the energy or time to deal with this today? Do you think you might be talking about yourself? and she puts her phone down. Yeah, she is silenced. No, she chooses not to go and say something stupid on the internet. That's not censorship. People disagreeing with you is not censorship. It's not someone infringing on your freedom of speech, you maniac.
And the ones that are saying, I wouldn't rape you, and the others that are saying, this is not an insult, that they're saying they wouldn't rape you. It's as though you should be grateful somehow for that.
I actually was saying something quite nice about my leader. I was saying I won't plot behind his back, I'll tell him to his face.
You can't make jokes. There are certain types of people involved in these groups where you just can't have a sense of humour.
If there is anything that I would like to do in politics is try and put if even a tiny bit of lightness in it, into it, because being able to laugh at ourselves, and I have made ridiculous statements that have caused huge outrage, and we politicians have got to learn to be able to be better, to just go, oh well, I made a mistake and move on.
Good one.
And the issue about dogpiling is not, it's not actually the abusive things that they're saying, is that it will completely crowd out any conversation that anyone can have. It is literally sent to silence you. You cannot see your Twitter feed anymore, you cannot communicate with anybody, and it is entirely sent to silence somebody they think should shut up. So there is definitely an issue, and one of the tech solutions that I would like to see, and I've spoken to some people in the room today about how they're developing certain pieces of software, is that if I have blocked somebody, and I blocked him a long time ago, I didn't even see the original rape non-threat.
I happen to entirely agree with Phillips's proposed tech solution, more of which in a minute, because had it been in place, Phillips would not have been invited to view any responses arising from Sargon of Akkad's initial tweet. And it seems highly unlikely that the dogpiling incident would have actually occurred at all. Because something that Phillips omits to mention is that many people involved in this dogpiling incident were reacting to Phillips's own tweet, where she commented on the observation made by someone with considerably less followers than Phillips has herself. And anyone inspecting Phillips's mentions and notifications for the period will see that a significant number of the initial 600 notifications, which eventually spiraled to over 5,000, were made by people acting supportively towards Phillips and expressing disgust at the possibility that she was once again being subjected to rape threats on a very open and public social media platform such as Twitter.
Yeah, it's about 5,000 people, 5,000 notifications or mentions that I've got.
Yeah.
I don't want to see anyone who responds to that tweet, even if you're sticking up for me. I don't want to have to see that conversation because it just is too much information for me to deal with. So that is one area tech solution that I want to see. I also want to see responses where platforms are working together, because obviously in my case there is an issue between the YouTube call out and the Twitter weapon. I would personally like to see further action of getting rid of people from these platforms who we know. This man has a brand. Him and other men's rights activists such as Nero have a brand that they use specifically for this abuse, and that brand matters to them because it makes them money, and actually we could really hurt them by damaging their brand, by taking it off air.
Okay, so now we're really getting to the heart of the matter, and at the risk of verging into conspiracy theories, because I do think the two incidents are largely coincidental, it is worthwhile noting that Nero, aka Milo Yiannopoulos, was permanently banned from Twitter the following day after disagreeing with a Ghostbuster.
And I understand the arguments for and against that sort of action. However, if this man was stood outside my house screaming at me and encouraging people to bring a crowd of people to also scream at me, he would be arrested, and so would all of the people who followed him. So there is, whilst I'm a defender of the freedom of speech, it is not the freedom to insult and silence people like me or like anyone who is suffering this sort of crime.
I've looked at the guidelines for what under existing law could be treated as a crime. Have you contacted the police?
I haven't on this incident. I mean, obviously, it all sort of happened yesterday. It was a bank holiday. I was actually, whilst these people think that I'm sitting around playing the victim, I was playing games in the garden with my children most of the day. So I don't let it bother me. I will speak to the police. I don't need to contact the police anymore because the police, my local police officers, watch what happens on Twitter and they get in touch with me.
The West Midlands Police deny that they regularly invest resources into following the Twitter feeds of members of Parliament or anyone else for that matter. And given that the company that the gentleman on the panel is quietly representing didn't agree with Phillips's remarkably heightened perception of what did or didn't happen during the dogpiling incident. Presumably one of the reasons that Phillips didn't contact the West Midlands Police over the matter, nor did they contact her, was because over and above some evidence that about 100 people were trolling an outspoken and controversial Member of Parliament on social media, there is no evidence, as Phillips suggests, that any sort of crime occurred.
So these are a number of the things that I would like to see the tech companies doing, and also there's got to be some upskilling of the police forces along the way. Some of the responses from the police and the CPS this morning are the exact same responses I have heard for the reasons that we don't get rape convictions in this country over the past 5 years, the reasons why we don't get domestic violence convictions over the last 5 years. It is unfortunately the same pattern of excuses sounds too hard a word, but it's the same effect of just saying, oh, you know, well, they have to collect this data and we only see this. And it's the same conversation I've been having for the past 10 years in domestic and sexual violence. So
Presumably, she is talking about legal technicalities like facts and actual evidence that is thankfully still required by the courts if they're going to pass down a life-changing sentence on a chap in this country.
And what I'm sure everybody in this place wants to say, the most important message, and a message victims of domestic and sexual violence rarely hear, is that we believe you. And that is those 3 words. If every single one of us could just tell everybody to stand and say, we believe you, we could change things for victims of domestic violence who are frequently disbelieved by every single agency that they are put in front of.
Phillips is, of course, a strong advocate of believing the victim, as long as the victim is female, which is fair enough as far as it's fair enough. But, based on her own twisted testimony, shamelessly voiced in front of a representative of the company that took no action after fully investigating the incident, she clearly believes that as the perceived victim in this incident, her perception of things alone should be enough to condemn a man to some sort of cyber gulag, if not prison. Such skewed testimony and the remarkable headlines they generate do have consequences. For a start, is it any wonder that girl guides are saying that these sort of headlines put them off entering politics and participating in online debates? And the Times recently reported that the number of people detained and questioned over so-called online trolling has risen nearly 50% in 2 years nationally, and by a staggering 877% over the same period in Jess Phillips's constituency. Half of all these investigations were dropped before prosecutions were brought, and the frightening allegation of sexual assault that the CPS pursued against Mark Pearson recently, despite CCTV evidence clearly proving his innocence, suggests that many of the 50% that are going in front of the courts may not realistically meet the CPS's own criteria of the extreme circumstances when prosecutions should be pursued under Section 127 of the Communications Act 2003, which makes it illegal to intentionally cause annoyance, inconvenience, or needless anxiety to another. And of course, once you call for action to silence your ideological opponents, you can't necessarily control the consequences of that action. And one extremely significant outcome that followed Phillips's call to hit Sargon of Akkad where it hurts was, of course, the YouTube adpocalypse, which was triggered by the UK Parliament's Home Affairs Committee, which is chaired by none other than Jess's Reclaim the Internet comrade Yvette Cooper, after they accused Google and YouTube of profiting from extremism and hatred. For the uninitiated, here's a recent summary from BBC Online explaining how this has affected a range of YouTubers, including women's rights activists.
So it started on December 2016 when I saw the first movie of a woman who was trafficked in the United States by her nanny, and she tells her story, and it got the yellow dollar, and I didn't know what's the yellow dollar means. So I asked, they told me that topics of sexual abuse and rape are out. They are not advertiser friendly. They won't be able to monetize them. We have right now about 35 videos and more than 15 demonetized videos. We stay without any source of income and we can't bring more women forward. And believe me, we have so many stories from all over the world, and that's gonna be hard.
I think it went on like trigger words of like suicide. So instead of like trying to figure out, is this a video encouraging suicide or is this a video asking or encouraging you to get help? It's like, well, if it says the word suicide in the tags, we'll just demonetize it. And that's easier to do. And I think that's really unfortunate. I hope that that they can make the sort of algorithm to determine which videos are advertiser friendly better, because it's discouraging people from making really helpful content, because people have their livelihoods based on the videos that they make.
Such an unfortunate outcome would be even more ironic if I thought that Phillips was a sincere and ethical champion of victims of violence, which personally I don't.
And what I'm sure everybody in this place wants to say, the most important message, and a message victims of domestic and sexual violence rarely hear, is that it happens to men too, you know.
It happens to men.
Do you want a point? It happens to men as well. Oh, yeah, okay.
But anyway, allow me to finish with a quick tale about silencing voices on the internet, after we hear from Jess Phillips one last time to help add some context.
As far as the campaign is concerned, what are you going to be asking social media sites to do about it, to police this kind of thing?
I mean, all the big names have join the campaign. What I'm not asking them specifically to do anything as a politician. As a user of Twitter, I'm asking Twitter to do a certain number of things. But the campaign is, in the first stage, is a conversation with the online community. And there is a website where there's lots of forums on it for people to give suggestions. We are a massive hive brain of people. There's got to be some solutions in there. So what I'm asking the providers to do is listen to what those people are saying.
If you're a service provider or simply an individual interested in taking Phillips at her word and listening to what those people have to say, well, unfortunately you can't, because their voices have quite literally been silenced by the Reclaim the Internet campaign organisers. Embarrassingly for them, this much mooted crowdsourcing initiative didn't manage to recruit very many volunteers at all. And when Phillips and her comrades listened to what the people that did bother to participate had to say, they found that most of them were saying things that they didn't particularly want to hear, such as that their campaign appeared to be unnecessarily narrow and ideological in scope, and that it appeared to be as much about silencing people they disagreed with as it was about seriously addressing criminal activity on the internet. And predictably, such views weren't shared in the echo chamber where Phillips gave her talk, and those voices were permanently silenced soon thereafter when the entire section of the website was quietly deposited down the Labour Party's memory hole, metaphorically speaking, of course.
The internet must be a forum for freedom of speech, but that also means that every voice should matter. Wait, does it? I mean, what, even the trolls that you block and deride because you don't like what they have to say? Do their voices matter as well, do they? Because I don't think that you do think their voices matter. But what's more, this is like some kind of request for an equal outcome, isn't it? You know, everyone's got the access to the internet, everyone has equal opportunity and can exercise their freedom of speech. But you want every voice to matter. That's the outcome that you're asking for, really, isn't it? I mean, it's like you're asking for some kind of social communism. I wonder if there's a better word for that, a better term for that.
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.